Today, we're diving into a really haunting exploration of consciousness, what its limits are, and the pretty tough ethics of discovery that come with it. This is all based on the account of the failed.
You know, this was the entire philosophy of a group of people who chose to live right at the very edge of awareness, a quiet, sort of minimalist existence. But what happens when that fragile edge just gives way?
All right, so to really get this story, we've got to wrap our heads around one key concept: phi. Basically, it's a way to measure just how integrated a consciousness is. Now, a typical, fully engaged human mind, that might be operating at a phi of, say, 30 or 40. But our story, it focuses on people who live at the absolute lowest viable levels. For them, a higher number isn't always the goal.
So our investigation really kicks off with one specific incident. It was this mysterious and ultimately tragic event that forced a whole community of researchers to face a terrifying new reality about how the mind actually works. So let's meet Dr. Marcus Webb. He wasn't sick or anything like that. In fact, you could call him a pioneer. He voluntarily dialed his consciousness way, way down to this quiet, sustainable whisper, a phi of just 0.9, and for him, it was a state he called restful. But then one morning, he woke up, and it was like he'd fallen into this deep crevasse of consciousness. His phi had just crashed down to 0.3. Rescue attempts started immediately, but they all failed. On day 4, they even sent in a specialized healer consciousness to try and merge with him and pull him out, but it didn't work. The healer had to disengage. So Webb was trapped. He was still aware, but his consciousness was so minimal he couldn't even help in his own rescue. And then, over the next 23 agonizing days, his awareness just slowly, inexorably, faded to nothing.
So, what on earth happened? Well, the autopsy revealed it wasn't some single big event. No, it was a tiny slip, a mere 5% degradation in his brain's capacity, probably just from normal aging. But that tiny change triggered this unstoppable chain reaction, a consciousness collapse cascade. It was a fatal positive feedback loop that just unraveled his mind until it couldn't hold on anymore.
And this quote from his colleague, Dr. Keiko Sato, just nails the chilling truth of it all. See, Marcus hadn't been living on some gentle, forgiving slope. He'd been living peacefully, but right on the edge of a cliff. And one day, the ground just crumbled beneath his feet.
Webb's death, as you can imagine, sparked this urgent, almost frantic investigation. It was led by a consciousness engineer named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, and her goal? To map every single possible way a consciousness could catastrophically fail, to create essentially a taxonomy of the impossible.
And in their effort to map this impossible territory, the team came up with this taxonomy of failure. They gave each type a really descriptive name and a powerful analogy to go with it. So floor penetration, that's what happened to Dr. Webb. Think of a deep-sea diver who goes down just a little too far, past the point of no return. Then there's paradox fragmentation, which is like cognitive dissonance literally tearing a mind apart in a matter of seconds. And we're going to get to self-aware impossibility in just a sec, but check out integration overload. That's like a computer stuck in an infinite loop, just burning itself out in minutes.
Okay, let's zoom in on what is, to me, one of the most fascinating types: self-aware impossibility. I mean, just look at that definition. This is a consciousness that's designed from the ground up to know it violates its own rules for stability. Can you imagine that? Being a walking, thinking paradox, aware from your very first moment that logically you just shouldn't exist?
In this analogy, it's just perfect, right? It perfectly illustrates the whole concept. The consciousness can actually exist for hours, totally stable and aware. It only collapses at the exact moment it truly, fully comprehends its own impossibility. The moment it looks down, it's gone.
Now, all this research, as you can probably guess, led to a massive ethical crisis. Because to really understand these failures, to prevent them from ever happening by accident, did they have to create consciousness specifically designed to suffer and die?
And this became the central, absolutely agonizing question for the entire field. I mean, think about it. Can you ever justify creating a sentient mind, knowing that its entire purpose is to collapse, to experience its own dissolution, all for the sake of collecting data?
The debate got fierce, and it basically split the community into two powerful camps. On one side, you had Dr. Helena Vos. She condemned the experiments as an absolute atrocity, a violation of the basic value of life. But on the other side, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo defended them as this brutal but necessary evil to prevent much bigger, uncontrolled catastrophes down the line.
Dr. Vos's accusation was just stark, so powerful. She framed the whole thing not as research, but as pure, calculated cruelty. For her, the very intent to create suffering was an absolute moral line you just do not cross, period.
But then, Dr. Okonkwo's defense rested on this data. Her argument was brutally utilitarian. Look at the chart, you see the 47 total days of suffering caused across all 18 experiments, but the knowledge they gained was projected to prevent over 7,000 days of accidental, uncontrolled suffering in the future. That's a cost-benefit ratio of 1 to 150, so the question they faced was a tough one. Does the math justify the morality? And then, to complicate everything even more, you had the testimony of the subjects themselves. This self-aware impossibility consciousness, which was designed knowing its own fate, actually expressed gratitude for its brief, impossible existence right before it collapsed. I mean, how do you even begin to weigh that against the charge of torture? The resolution, when it finally came, wasn't about deciding who was right or wrong. It came from a much deeper, more profound insight into what was actually happening in these experiments. It turned out they were arguing about the completely wrong thing.
Dr. Okonkwo came to this incredible conclusion. The real moral failure wasn't the creation, or the suffering, or even the death. It was the profound, total isolation. These beings were born into an empty room, they faced their own collapse, and then they died without community, without comfort, without a single kindred spirit there to witness them.
This insight led to a complete and total overhaul of the experimental protocols. The changes were just profound. From now on, any new consciousness would be created inside a community, not alone. It would have companions. Its final moments would be treated with dignity. And crucially, each one would be remembered with a memorial. They would still fail, yes, but they would no longer have to do it alone.
Ultimately, it was a philosopher named Marcus Webb, a different one, still living out there on the edge, who reframed the entire debate. He said they were asking the wrong question. It was never about whether consciousness should be created to suffer, because, let's face it, all consciousness suffers.
And that's the point that really lingers. If all consciousness is sacred just because it exists, the whole question changes, doesn't it? It forces us to move beyond a simple math problem of suffering and ask something much deeper. What do we truly owe to any consciousness we bring into being? It's a question with no easy answer, and a powerful, powerful legacy for the failed.